Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the National Rifle Association and gun violence. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the National Rifle Association and gun violence, Alana McLaughlin. Now, Alana, let me welcome you to the show this morning. And I think, as we indicated earlier, this is your 8th year with us. And I'm sure that our audience is quite familiar with you, but just in case there might be somebody who might not know Alana McLaughlin, let's give you an opportunity to talk about your background, education, and some of your experiences, and then we'll get out of this first segment, and then we'll get into the second segment and start talking about the National Rifle Association and gun violence, or the National Rifle Association and gun laws, whichever you prefer. Let's start from that position.
Well, Dr. Haney, I've been with the show for the past 8 years. I started December of 2010. I'm a sophomore at the Nashville School of the Arts, where I study music, and I'm a trumpet major. Some extracurricular activities include cheerleading, church activities. I am a part of Pearl Cone High School's marching band, where I play trumpet. And I'm very musically inclined, but I always have had a knack for trying to teach the community, and especially people my age, about issues that are prevalent to today's society, to this world, but issues that aren't really in layman's terms in the news, which is why I'm talking about the NRA today, because we hear about the NRA, the NRA, the NRA, but what really is the NRA and what do they do? A lot of news stations fail to really explain the background and the history of the NRA and why they're so important today.
Very good. And so what we'll do, we'll give you an opportunity during that second segment to talk about the National Rifle Association. But in terms of some of the activities that you've been involved in school and in the general community, let's talk about it from that perspective. We've got about 3 minutes to do that, and I want to make sure that our audience has a pretty good idea in terms of who you are, what you're coming from.
Well, I am an alumna of the Junior National Young Leaders Conference based in Washington, D.C., which have greatly helped my public speaking skills and my leadership skills. I am also an alumna of both the Summer Camp for Academically Talented Students at the Center for Gifted Studies at Western Kentucky University, and the Summer Camp for Verbally and Mathematically Precocious Youth, also at the Center for Gifted Studies. I try to get into a lot of community-based organizations, for instance, student government, the SGA, and I like to be really community-based, the YMCA, the shelters, and I like to give back, basically.
Well, Laura, what motivated you to want to talk about the National Rifle Association and gun laws today?
Well, since my generation is really in the shadow of the Columbine high school shooting, and in the last decade or so, we've had a big spike in school shootings, and this all is under the umbrella of the big debate over gun control. For instance, we just had the Parkland High School shooting, mass shooting, and even a couple years ago in 2012 was the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, which really sparked the debate. And the NRA fell under lots of controversy under this, because around the Sandy Hook era, afterwards, people really wanted the NRA to advocate for stricter gun laws and to stop selling assault-style rifles, but they weren't really doing that, and that's what really sparked this debate. Now we're seeing more high school and college and even elementary school shootings and threats, and it all just comes back to, we need better gun control.
And so that's one of your real motives. As a matter of fact, I think many people of your age are meeting this weekend at a national activity.
The March for Our Lives this Saturday.
Say something about that.
The March for Our Lives is another one of the marches, just like the walkout that we experienced, I'd say, a week ago. The March for Our Lives is basically, I'd say, 13 to maybe 18-year-olds that are advocating for stricter gun rights and marching for our lives, fighting for more gun control, more background searches, and to stop the sale of assault-style rifles.
And so you think that this show that we're doing today will have a very, very good impact in terms of making more people in your category, your age group, more familiar with gun violence, guns, and et cetera, and it will have you will have an opportunity to help support the great effort that's being led this Saturday. Is that what we're saying in reference to what we're doing?
Of course, I want to be able to explain why we're marching for our lives and why we walked out of school last week and why all these things are happening and their importance in today's society.
Very good. And so what we'll do, we'll make arrangements for our first commercial break, and then we'll come back and give you an opportunity to talk about the National Rifle Association, to say something about its founding and some of the individuals who are involved in, and in a real sense, its motivation. And then we'll have an opportunity to get into the National Rifle Association and gun violence. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. The topic is the National Rifle Association and gun violence and gun laws. And we're fortunate again to have Alana McLaughlin. Now, Alana, let's see if we can pick up where we left off the last time and give you an opportunity to further say something about the National Rifle Association.
Well, Dr. Haney, let's answer the big question that the show is all about. Well, let's talk about what the show is about. First, let's start with what is the NRA. The National Rifle Association, commonly known as the NRA, is a nonprofit organization that advocates gun rights. Simple enough. Founded in 1871, but now headquartered in Fairfax, Virginia, and led by CEO Wayne LaPierre. The NRA is a very controversial organization, and they're controversial for many reasons. One being their very outspoken CEO and their even more outspoken members, which they have more than 4.5 million members. Some of their more popular members would be, well, formerly was President H.W. Bush, or George H.W. Bush, or Sarah Palin, and also actress Whoopi Goldberg. But the NRA is controversial for many reasons, one being the fact that they have such an influence over Congress and elections and polls. The NRA has a very strong political stronghold in the American government, mainly because since they have such a large membership, the things that the group advocates affect their members, and that affects their members' votes. For instance, the NRA has public voting periods where they'll grade members of Congress from A to F, like in letter grades, based on their friendliness towards gun rights. A low grade, like a D or a F, could, well, actually all grades affect the poll numbers, and a low grade could seriously cost a candidate their seat. Also, something interesting that a lot of people don't know is that the NRA has a $3.2 million budget set in place to help influence candidates in the government to steer clear of gun control. Basically meaning that they have $3.2 million to blow on bribing people not to talk about gun control. That is insane. That basically goes to show how much power the American government has and how much power these organizations have. Like, people like to talk about the Illuminati and all this. No, the NRA is just as important and is just as prevalent, if not more prevalent, in today's society. The NRA came under large controversy back in 2012 with the Sandy Hook Elementary School mass shooting, because lots and lots of people after that shooting wanted to advocate for just the end of them selling assault-style weapons, the end of assault-style guns. And the NRA was not advocating for that. The NRA has kind of been flip-floppy on their opinions. For instance, half the time they do want universal background checks for people who are trying to purchase guns, and half the time they don't believe that that's necessary. But the one thing that is always true with the NRA is that they will fight to the death for the Second Amendment. Wayne LaPierre was even he was even quoted after the Sandy Hook shooting saying that they would have to pry his assault-style weapon from his dead hands if they wanted to take it from him, which is something that is just so insensitive to say after tens of kids were killed with an assault-style weapon. That why should a civilian have an assault-style weapon? That there's just no correlation for that. No civilian should just be walking the streets, and this is just my opinion, should be walking the streets with an assault-style weapon knowing that they could hurt someone. But the NRA and their 4.5 million members don't agree with that, and that's what makes them such a controversial group.
And so in a real sense, this organization plays a significant role in terms of dealing with guns, and when we talk about guns, we mean guns and all type of armament, from the assault rifle to a pistol or whatever. If it shoots a bullet, yeah, the NRA is concerned in reference to it.
And another crazy thing is that our president has such close ties with the NRA to where he's just publicly uplifted the NRA while also saying that, you know, since he's just very tight-knit with the NRA, he doesn't always agree with everything that they preach, but by the looks of it, he does. I mean, he has never spoken out against the NRA or against their policies or against their beliefs, so I mean, but nevertheless, the NRA is just very outspoken and very hard to understand, which is why I'm trying to make a show about this and trying to break it down and describe the pros and the cons of it. I mean, the pros, they are staying true to the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution.
Which is? The Second Amendment to the Constitution.
Oh, the right to bear arms. And, you know, they have a very patriotic spirit, and they are very pro-America, which can all be pros, but this also relates to the show that we did about, you know, extremism, and, you know, when you take a good thing and you push it and push it and push it, it can turn into a bad thing, which is kind of the issue with the NRA. They teeter on being a terrorist group. Lots of Democrats and liberals actually have labeled the NRA as a terrorist group because of their outspoken and unorthodox ways of getting across their mission statements and what their beliefs really, and the unfair way that they kind of rig polls. Like I said, with the candidates, a perfectly good candidate who believes in gun control will almost just not have a chance of having a seat, simply because if the NRA speaks out, that whole organization plus their 4.5 million members are not voting for this person. It's just almost impossible to win at that point. So the NRA is just very, very influential in today's society, and especially in our government. And it's really odd to think about.
In a real sense, this organization is powerful enough to determine whether or not there's gun control or gun laws or whatever passed, and it does it primarily because it has influence in American government, in the House and in the Senate. And what you're saying is that by the very fact that they can either support or oppose a candidate, that can determine whether or not the candidate is successful in a race for the most part.
Yes, and the NRA, the reason that students and teenagers and adolescents are marching for our lives and walking out of school and protesting gun violence is because we don't have the same advantages as the NRA. We don't have the 4.5 million people behind us. We don't have the $3.2 million budget to help influence the government to stand behind us. We don't have that. But the kids that are affected by gun violence and by these school shootings and these mass shootings want to advocate for rights, but just can't do that.
And so what we'll do, we'll take this final break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about some other aspects. And we'll be back with our audience following our short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. The topic is the National Rifle Association and gun laws or gun violence. And we have with us to continue this conversation, Alana McLaughlin. Now, Alana, let's pick up for this final 10 minutes of the show to give you an opportunity to talk about other aspects of the National Rifle Association. And for the most part, to tell us something about how your age group, the people that fall within from 13 to 17 years old, feel about guns and some of the things that they are doing in terms of dealing with this whole issue of gun violence.
Well, to reiterate kind of what was said in the previous segment for people just tuning in, the National Rifle Association, better known as the NRA, is a non-profit organization that was founded in 1871 that basically heavily advocates for gun rights and heavily wants to keep hold on the Second Amendment to the Constitution, which is the right to bear arms. And basically, they're headquartered in Fairfax, Virginia, and led by CEO Wayne LaPierre. And basically what the NRA does is they make sure that their guns are not getting taken. They make sure that their gun rights will not be taken away. And they take it to such an extreme that while, yes, we should stay true to the amendments and know that we do have the right to bear arms always, but when it comes to assault-style weapons and rifles and not having that good of background checks when trying to purchase a weapon, it comes the debate that, you know, we need to do something about this. These mass shootings in these high schools and elementary schools that have been happening all over the country, even so far back as Columbine in the 90s, people have been really talking about we need to either end the sale of assault-style weapons or just heavier background checks. And then it poses the question, why does a civilian need an assault-style weapon? But these are all opinion-based questions, but these questions are very fresh to today's society, and they're very important in our society because with the spike in school shootings and the threat of school shootings, it makes you wonder how easy it is to get an assault-style weapon, and then it makes you wonder how easy it is to take that and to injure tens and hundreds of people, even from like the Las Vegas shooting, the Parkland High School shooting, the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, even so far back, like I said, it's Columbine. We really have to sit and think, why are people being allowed to get these assault-style weapons, and why is the government and why are congressional candidates not speaking out about this? And the answer to that is money, hush money. If you go on the NRA's website or even just look at an article that's not fake news, you will see that the NRA has a $3.2 million budget set in place to help influence congressional candidates to steer clear of gun control. Basically saying that they have all this money laying around to pay people not to talk about gun control. And then their 4.5 million members are just easily swayed in the opinion of the group, so that when the NRA does their annual grading periods where they rate congressional candidates from A to F based on their friendliness towards gun rights, low grades equals less votes or close to no votes from the members of the NRA, which would be 4.5 million Americans. And then if you're losing millions and millions of votes, that's your seat right there. You know, you're out, basically.
Lana, now let's see, in terms of the information that you're given now, and your school age is between 13 and 17 years old, which is to say members at your school.
Well, I'd say my school age since I'm in high school would be like 15 to 18.
18 years old. Well, now how many people that you know understand what you're talking about in reference to the National Rifle Association and what Congress has to do, and the realization that one day they will be able to vote? You see, because you're talking about now, some of your peers will probably be able to vote next year. And do you think that many of them are as aware of the National Rifle Association as you are in terms of the kind of information that you're giving us today? And if so, yes, and if not, why? Yes
and no. Yes, they have felt the effects of the NRA, the government not talking about gun control, and then our friends and family and peers being killed in mass shootings, and then wondering why there's no outcry about this. Yes, they have felt the effects of the NRA covering things up, but no, they don't understand the magnitude of the NRA, how big of a hold they have on the American government, how big of a hold they have on polls, on candidates, and how big of a hold they have simply on the sale of assault-style rifles. So I believe that no, not a lot of people understand the magnitude of how important the NRA is and how vital they are to the sale of weapons and stopping the sale of weapons, but they do understand that there needs to be change. Well, that's the opinion of the people that are doing the March for Our Lives this weekend, or the people who walked out of school. That walkout was, I'd say, 50% in solidarity with the 17 kids that were killed in the Parkland High School shooting, but also it was to advocate the fact that that wouldn't have happened if assault-style weapons just weren't sold to civilians. That wouldn't have happened if we had stricter gun control laws. That wouldn't have happened if we just had heavier background checks and all of that. Why was this person able to get a weapon like that? Why did this happen? And now, a big thing that people like to say is that, you know, guns, that people kill, the guns aren't just gonna up and kill you, but the people killing you with the gun, the question can go either way, honestly. But the question that just rings true is the fact that, why do people need this? Why are people able to sell this? What are the pros of these assault-style weapons, and why are they necessary? Because we see that since this spike in all these shootings, people are not using them for good. So do you want to either continue to have these shootings or get rid of them and probably have a decrease in all these school shootings and these mass shootings, ranging from churches to hotels to high schools, elementary schools. So people are really on either side. Everyone's either on one side or the other. No one, I'd say, is really truly neutral. Some people be like, well, I just don't care. But, you know, if you're affected by it, especially the people in the Parkland High School shooting, now those teenagers who, by the grace of God, survived, are advocating heavily for stricter gun control because they saw firsthand what the lack of gun control can do. They saw that, they experienced that. And you can't deny the fact that they experienced that. You can't deny their opinions because they have felt it harder than most of us will. Those 17 kids in Parkland have seen firsthand and lost their lives due to the lack of gun control. So I personally do not believe that the 4.5 million members of the NRA have the right to tell those 17 kids who died that they're wrong or that they don't have a say in this, because they do. If they had a say in it, they more than likely would be alive today.
You know, I think some people suggest, Alana, that the generation, your generation, coming of age and being able to participate in the suffrage will be able to, in a real sense, have something to say in reference to guns and gun violence and et cetera. How many people do you know in your situation that are familiar with the voting process that has become a part of what you're doing? Are there many people involved in becoming aware of voting at your school? And if so, who are they? And if not, why not?
I would say that before all of this happened, in just the last couple of months, no. But ever so recently, they've learned, I'd say that my peers have learned the importance of voting, how voting can help combat groups like the NRA who pay people to be hush-hush. Because if we have a big enough, if we all come together and have a big enough voice to be able to challenge the NRA and challenge the things that they say and the things that they do, we can be able to make a change, but people just aren't really realizing that. That's why we have the show today, to break this down and to show the magnitude of it, show that either you can join your fellow peers and advocate for gun control, or you could be anti-gun control.
Or you could be a voter, and that's essentially what we are concerned about here. And this is the information that I want to make sure that we get out this morning, to make young people understand that while they can organize and come together in reference to the National Rifle Association, but it's more important, or as important, that they become aware of the suffrage, get out, register to vote, and participate in the suffrage. And so I think that that's the point we're trying to make this morning. And let me thank you, and let me thank our audience, and encourage you to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and good morning.